Hi, mystery writers. All right, welcome to the studio. And today we're going to talk about dealing with the biggest part of your story, the big, wide, vast, deep middle. And it is the biggest part of your story. So we're going to break it up into two parts. So today we're going to dive right in with dealing with your middle. Yeah, good beginning sets up the expectations, and a solid ending resolves your mystery. In the beginning, your reader enters your story world and meets your protagonist, your detective, and encounters a trigger that sets up the story, right? We've got a mystery to solve. In the end, your protagonist challenges the villain and resolves that story question. It's who did it, and you give your reader a sense of satisfaction. Between these two story points is that great, big, huge middle. That vast middle is where your story happens. And you deepen the story, enlarging on the premise at the beginning, and you expand your story, and you delve into the theme, you create subplots, and you enrich the understanding of your protagonist. And you do this by creating a line of conflicts, right? A line of conflicts that put more at stake as the story unfolds. It's a lot of work. I just be honest with you, it is a lot of work. So the middle is where you deliver on that story promise that you gave at the beginning of the story. And for the sake of clarity, I'm using the 4-act structure. So there's the beginning, there's before the midpoint, there's after the midpoint, and there's the climax resolution. So we all understand where we are in the story progress. So the first thing we want to do, once you set that story in motion, it's time to expand. And in Act 2, after Act 1, all right, your protagonist and your reader enter that discovery phase. Now's the time to keep your reader interested in your story. You have the entire rest of the novel to build your story to a climax. So give your reader more of the story. This is where it starts to get really juicy, right? In your mystery, your detective explores the victim's world. Your detective attempts to make connections between the victim and the suspects. So we've got a great big problem here that your detective has to deal with, and you want to explore what started your protagonist on this story journey, on this commitment to solving the puzzle. So for mystery writers, your detective is now investigating the crime. They may go to the murder scene to discover clues. They discover the murder victim's connections to other people. They start to try and identify suspects and interview those suspects. And they examine the evidence, any clues, any physical evidence, to determine what can lead them toward discovering the villain. So, by providing details related to the problem, solving the mystery, right, you emphasize its importance, and the reader feels the dilemmas the problem present are important to the protagonist and the story. So everything feels connected as far as your reader's concerned. So first of all, when you think about your protagonist, your detective, you want to expand your reader's knowledge of who that person is. And they saw them in their everyday world, and now we get to show them how they think, what actions they take, how they respond to challenges, how they respond to opponents, um, anything that tries to lead them away from their primary goal of solving the crime. So you want to show how your sleuth goes about discovering evidence. So, do they think rationally or act first and think later? It could be either one, but you want to show your reader how your detective goes about approaching this problem. So, you're expanding your reader's understanding of how your detective works. What does your detective notice? What's their interview style? How do they comport themselves when they're talking with suspects? Who else is in your sleuth's world? Now you get to really bring in any supporting cast, as it were, that surround your protagonist. Do they have a sidekick? Do they have a mentor? Do they have a friend? Do they have an opposition, somebody who's really opposed to their success? Do they have a love interest? This is the time when you start bringing in all these other people in your detective's world. And your reader learns your protagonist is human and three-dimensional. We want to start with that, but now you're going to expand on how they are a really three-dimensional character. So as you introduce small conflicts, your reader learns how the protagonist deals with obstruction. So we're training the reader to understand how your detective works. And this is a setup for how they're going to deal with bigger problems later on, and we're going to get to those next week. All right. So as you expand your reader's vision and understanding of the protagonist, you're reassuring that reader that you're delivering on what you promised. Right? The whole first part of your story was a promise to the reader that this is going to be a great mystery. You're really going to like hanging out with this protagonist, and we're going to find out how this protagonist goes about solving a puzzle. And they're reading the right genre. They really feel that, yes, I'm a mystery lover, and this feels like a mystery to me. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but you want to reassure them that that's what they're doing, and that your protagonist, your sleuth, is the perfect hero for the story, and your reader cares. So it really going to show them who your detective is. Okay, and at this time, we're going to get this big slew of supporting characters. All these characters come on board. So we're bringing on the cast. In Act 2, remember this is 4 acts, you're expanding the story to bring your reader into all the facets of your story. And supporting characters mirror different aspects of the theme and your protagonist. And they enliven the story world with their personalities, showing different aspects of your protagonist's strengths and weaknesses. This is how, because your protagonist is interacting with these people, your reader really understands more about them. So, who lives in this story world? And how do they relate to your sleuth? And how do they relate to each other? Right? If, say, your detective has a sidekick and a love interest, I'm just making this up off the top of my head. So, how do those two people relate to each other? Does your sidekick like the love interest? Or they like, I don't know if this is the one or not. You know, you want to show those aspects of these supporting characters. Mystery writers especially want to introduce your suspects, and that includes the villain. Nobody but you knows who the villain is yet, but your reader won't know they are the villain until much, much later in the story. So at this point in your story, in Act 2, the villain is one of several suspects. So you want to complicate your hero's life, um, in this part too. So you can bring in an opponent. Is there a colleague who's determined to undermine your hero's goal? And is there a love interest? Your mystery novel doesn't need a love interest, but if there is one, you want to introduce that as well. Um, and how does your protagonist relate to that love interest? Is it something for the moment? Is it something like, oh my gosh, this is the one? Anyway, you want to complicate your hero's life during this section of your story in Act Two. Um, so supporting characters help the reader get interested in the story, and as your hero interacts with all these different people and characters, you give your reader opportunities to empathize and engage with your hero and the story. Remember, your hero is your mystery reader's guide to everything that's happening in the story. Also, here in Act Two, you can start introducing your subplots. So, you may want one, possibly two subplots, otherwise, your subplots will start taking away from the mystery puzzle itself. They add dimension to your story, and they create these little mini stories within your story. And without added breadth, your story can feel flat. It's like, okay, the detective's plodding along, solving this mystery, and those subplots add new dimensions to the story um, and go into the other characters as well, right? They subplots really humanize your story. In the real world, for us as real people, right? We never have just one problem to solve. Oh my gosh, would that life were that simple, but it's not. And you want to make it the same for your detective. There isn't just one problem to solve, solving the mystery, the puzzle, right? You want to give them other problems to solve. And they add dimension to your protagonist and open up opportunities for your reader to empathize with them because they have all these other things going on in their life that complicate their main purpose, which is to solve the mystery. So in this Act Two, also you want to have a choice, the choice that your detective makes. They make a difficult but necessary choice. Um, they mean well, but it seems like the best course of action, um, the consequences of that course of action are going to set them on the wrong path. And this choice is often called the first pinch point. It kind of comes in the middle of Act Two. Um, and this choice pushes the protagonist toward the midpoint. And I've talked about this before that when you're writing, you want to go to the next story point. You don't have to think about the end at the beginning of in Act Two. You're just going to the next story point. So I just footnote here. Sometimes if you get stuck, instead of thinking about the end and how this mystery is going to resolve, just think about how you're going to get to that next story point. So the first part of the middle, Act Two, for us with a 4-act structure, expands your story. You're delivering on that promise that you gave your reader at the beginning that this is a mystery and this is the protagonist and there's going to be a crime to solve. And now we're going to get into the meat of um, finding that of solving that crime, and that's why this first part is all about discovery. It's meeting, it's identifying the suspects, meeting them, discovering who they are, discovering their relationships with the victim. Um, you and for your reader, you're going to show them how all the characters in your story world interact with each other, all right, and how they confront with obstacles, how they respond. And this is especially true for your protagonist. You're exposing their character traits. So for the reader, this is a discovery process as well. Not only are they discovering, who are the suspects and that sort of thing, but they're also discovering who is this sleuth that's going to solve this mystery. You're giving them more and more about your sleuth. Um, your reader gets to know that character and really root for them because things are going to get tougher in the next act. Uh, because after the midpoint in Act 3, which we're going to talk about next week, we're going to disrupt a whole bunch of expectations the reader has and and create a whole new world of problem solving, as it were. So this Act 2 is where you lay the groundwork for all the reversals and the major conflicts and the surprises that escalate in the second half of the middle. So next week I'm going to talk about that second half and how to work with that. And I know the middle is challenging. It's big. It's just big. If you have Act 2 and Act 3, that is the major part of your whole entire story. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. And thank you for being here. And keep writing. And I'll see you next week with what we do after the middle. All right. Thank you.